Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today I'm finally allowed or going to talk to you about the new Kaby Lake processors and the Z170. See, I'm already saying it wrong. It's the Z270 chipset. Why can't they have bigger name differences? Because it's going to be incredibly confusing. If I get them wrong, I will say from the beginning, I apologise. Everything, well, most of the stuff we're going to talk to you about today is the Z270 chipset, although we will be comparing. Anyway, we're already off tangent. This is not good, a good sign for one of my videos. Anyway, so with the Kaby Lake stuff, to be honest with you, I very much, or very almost, didn't bother making the CPU review because there have been so many leaks already with people that were unhappy with the way that Intel had dealt with stuff this time. And to be fair, I did get my i7 processor from Intel. I did have to source the i5 from other places, as loads of the leaks had already kind of sourced them from other places anyway. But the other thing is even though I did get my i7 from Intel, I've had to make this video super late because I've actually been testing the boards for a few weeks. But I had to make this video really late because I was actually hoping to get all the technical information through and the PDFs and the white sheets for me to be able to get everything to talk to you about in this video, and I didn't get them. And I'd kept my nose clean. I'd done everything that I could have and should have done, and they just hadn't sent them. So I'm going to do my very best with this. What you need to realise is I've sourced my information from all the leaks that have come online. So it's a bit backwards, and it's not something I'm particularly happy about either. It's not the normal way of doing things. I don't know, where it slipped this time, but like I said, it's considering that the timing of this coming right over the Christmas period and being a really early launch in January, it's just added to a lot more stress that didn't particularly need to be there, and I don't think it's particularly fair. But anyway, enough of me ranting. What we're going to talk about is the new i7, we're going to talk about the new i5, we're going to talk about the new motherboards with the Z270 chipset as well, because there are a few changes. One of the first changes to talk about is Intel was kind of famed for their tick-tock process. So you would have a new architecture, and then you would have refinement. And essentially, you'd have the new architecture, so for argument's sake, Sandy Bridge, and then what would happen is they would shrink it down a little bit, and they would add extra things on, like back in the day when like USB 3 first came out, and rather than it being an add-on chip, they then brought it into the chipset. So that would have been the refinement. Well, now we've got a new thing where it's process, architecture, and then optimization. Kaby Lake is the last of that step, so we're in the optimization step. So if we work backwards, if Kaby Lake is optimization, that meant Sky Lake was architecture, and then the one before that, which was Broadwell, that was process, because Broadwell was the first of the 14 nanometer process. With Kaby Lake, we are still on the 14 nanometer, but it's been refined, so it's 14 nanometer FinFET Plus. And when we talk about the results later on and the overclocking and that sort of thing, there is some marginal difference with some of the benchmarks, but there also is some difference with not necessarily performance, but like overclocking and the memory controller, things like that. They're a little bit complicated. There is no it's this. But we're still on the 1151 socket. So this is an important thing to say about. Also, because we are still on the 1151 socket, this Z170 chipset, which is the previous generation, so for argument's sake, like the Maximus 8, they will actually support Kaby Lake and kind of vice versa. So if for argument's sake, if your old Z170 board had just gone pop, but your CPU is Sky Lake, you could just buy a Z270 board and stick your old Sky Lake into one of the new ones. So there's a bit of crisscross, which is kind of good because it does seem like Intel brings out sockets every other year. Well, they do bring them out every other year, but anyway. Also, with this new kind of three-step rather than two-step, what that does mean, two-step makes me want to think about Save the Last Dance. So what that does mean is we do have half a chance of being able to have a board and kit for that little bit longer. It also means that they're going to spend a little bit more time with R&D as well. So with the new processors, we have the i5, which is the 7600K, and that comes in at 3.8 gigahertz. It turbos to 4.2 gigahertz, and it's got 4 cores. When we talk about the i7, that's the 7700K. It's 4.2 gigahertz, turbos to 4.5 gigahertz, and that's 4 cores with hyper-threading. So your PC kind of sees 8 threads. We don't need to kind of discuss about hyper-threading. Now, there has been a lot of discussions about temperatures, and in that they do need to be well cooled. And when I first started testing, I would have said, yes, they do need to be incredibly well cooled. They did seem hotter, but because now I'm filming this video, I have actually done all of my testing on all of the other motherboards. So if you're interested in the actual motherboard reviews, I've got a lot of them going up on the channel. So you can go to the channel, or please go through to the OC3D website as well, because we've got all of the tests there. I only pick a few out to talk to you about in the videos. We can go and click and have a look through. The CPUs will be compared to other CPUs, but the motherboards, what we've done is we've tested a load of them so that the motherboards are all directly comparable at launch as well. So essentially the graphs are pretty much the same across all the motherboard reviews, because we've made one lot of graphs, because it made our lives a bit easier rather than having 2 motherboards, then 3, then 4. But anyway, so you can go and have a look at those. But one of the things I can say is they did seem hot. I will say that. But then there was a couple of BIOS revisions where the temperatures plummeted. And I think what it was is there are some voltages and stuff in the backgrounds that the BIOS teams and the dev teams are now starting to get in check, and are not kind of on auto and going crazy. If you go and look for the actual board reviews, there was one board review where I would say that there was at least an 8 degrees temperature drop just because of one BIOS change. So one of the things I will say, and that's whether you have one of these or any of the other motherboards, keep your eye on your motherboard BIOS updates. Do them manually, don't let it do it through the web. Do them manually with a USB stick. Stay on top of those. They will be coming thick and fast. I've lost count of the amount of the ones I've got. So if you do buy them, you know, if you do get a 7600K, or you end up getting a Z270 board, keep an eye on them, because there will be a lot of performance increases. Like I said, it could bring temperature decreases. It could also, and one of the things I will say is the memory performance is probably going to be the area where the performance increases are going to come thick and fast as they're deving the actual kits, and they get optimized for the boards. They will work, but the performance does tend to kind of go that way rather quickly. So the Z270 chipset, the kind of thing underneath, they have PCI Express lanes on them. The old 170 chipset had 20 lanes. Now we need PCI Express lanes for many things. USB 3, USB 3.1, they all kind of use up PCI Express lanes. SATA uses them up as well. Normally your PCI Express 1 lanes, they normally come from on the chipset as well. Now with previous generations of boards, you always had a few on there, but they ramped it up with the Z170. Like I said, they popped it up to 20. And that was basically so that you could have PCI Express storage like your M.2s and the U.2s if you had one of the more expensive boards that had that. And that meant that the 16 PCI Express lanes that you get on the CPU is just for your graphics. So you have 16 for your graphics, and if you wanted to run dual graphics, it just means it shares the 16 and you get 8 across each. And then anything else that needs PCI Express on the board all comes from the chipset itself. Well, with Z270, what they've done now is they've added an extra 4 PCI Express lanes in. And it does get a little bit complicated with the way that it does it, but you'll see that most of the motherboards that have been released now have got dual M.2. With that dual M.2, it does open up the fact that you can easily RAID them. Some of the boards have got software available to, you know, be able to click you through and make it a more streamlined process. But it does mean that we've got multiple M.2 on there now. It also means that you've got an easier route if you wanted an M.2 drive and a U.2 drive, whether the U.2 ever really kind of catches on, because at the time of going to press and me making this video, I only really know of the Intel 750M U.2 drive that's available on the market. Everyone seems to be concentrating on the M.2 as it's smaller, cheaper to produce, all that sort of stuff. So with the, we're used to having one M.2 on the Z170 drives. With the second one, it does get kind of complicated. And if you want to use that second one, you will lose the SATA port 5 and 6 on the board, or it will share the bandwidth with 5 and 6. And that really comes down to the way that the motherboard manufacturers want to swing with it. Some will just turn it off and you'll just have all of the bandwidth going into the M.2. And some of them, like I said, you'll share. So you might get a slight performance decrease if you're running drives in that. So go careful with the way that you look. And you can look in your the block diagram for the chipset for your specific board to work out how it's done it. And it's not that the SATA 5 and 6 has enough PCI Express bandwidth to feed the second M.2. It's just if you do use the second M.2, what it does is it steals or shares that 5 and 6 to give it enough bandwidth, because it obviously needs PCI Express 3 and 4 of those lanes. So the way that they've got around doing it with all the extra bits on the board as well is if you do run that second one, the 5 and 6 is just, you know, it takes a hit or gets turned off to make sure that the M.2 gets all of the bandwidth that it needs. Right, so we've covered that. To be honest with you, with the other stuff that's on the board, it's not really changed, you know, a massive amount chipset-wise. There's nothing else massively on there that's like... Some of the boards are now coming with a USB 3.1 internal stroke external header. And by that I mean you've got a USB 3.1 header on the board itself, which is for your front panel. So it's something that the case manufacturers now need to kind of jump on board with. And you can now have USB 3.1 on the front of your case, and there's a header for it now. So that's the only kind of other big change. So when we start talking about performance, I'll talk to you about overclocking. Now, with the way that I've done it, I've tested it on the Z270A, and that's because it's not a screaming edge Asus board. It's quite an accessible one. I think that the prices are going to come in around 160 for this. It's gone up a little bit over the years. You can kind of blame that on whatever kind of political kind of scenario that happened in 2016 and ruined everything. But anyway, so about 160, I would say it's kind of, it's not an entry level board, but it's a decent kind of beginner starter kind of thing. And the reason why I use this is I've used the A's, X99 A's, Z170 A's, you know, I've been using them for a while, and it just gives me a really nice starting point. And then when I start testing the other boards, because I normally move upwards from this, when I start testing the other boards, you can see if we've got extra power phases, we can see if there's a difference. If they've got more bits and bobs on there, we can, you know, this is just a really nice place for us to dump it in, and it's a nice start. So with the i5 and the i7, people have been kind of shouting about overclocking, and I will say that for the ones that I've seen, and I've been lucky enough to get out into the field and see other stuff being built as well, so it's not just with the samples that I've had here, 5 gigahertz does seem to be a good achievable overclock for both the i5 and the i7. They seem to be around, I've seen, around 1.3 volts. But obviously, the one thing I need to stress is don't now go to your CPU, go and put 1.3 in and a 50 multiplier and just expect it to work. Because there is a thing called the silicon lottery. I have got an overclock that I've seen 5.2. But it also depends on your board as well, because some of the boards don't seem to be able to push past that 5 mark and become really unstable. And it also kind of depends on your memory as well. One of the things that I will say is if you're going to run high-speed memory. So because I've seen on some of the boards that I've tested, as you'll have to go and see on the other reviews, I have seen 4000 megahertz memory, bench stable, beyond 5 gigahertz, but you do have to be incredibly careful with the subsidiary volts in the BIOS. So if you're going to go and buy yourself a 7700K and you're then going to go and go, all right, because of this new, you're going to go and buy 3600 megahertz memory, click it in, enable XMP, bosh, run my system. I wouldn't be surprised if there are a lot of you out there that ended up with a dead processor within 12 months because of the way that the BIOS works with the other volts. I will be doing a specific, I know I've said this before, but I will be doing a specific guide for setting up high-speed memory on the Z270 platform so that you can see and know what voltages you need to tie in manually. So if you're going to buy one of these and you're interested in the high-speed memory, because to be honest with you, it's BIOS dependent, but from my testing, everything that I've tested has done 3866 megahertz memory. Some of the, one of them, or a couple of them, have done 4000, but it is very BIOS dependent. One of the manufacturers actually blocked me from going beyond 3866 in the BIOS, because it was a bit of a retarded move, to be fair. But as the BIOS matures, I can see that we're going to be going beyond 4000 megahertz. Now, this is going to be a very kind of niche area of the market, but it's actually going to be one of those areas of the market where you're going to have to be a proper enthusiast as well, because you're not going to be able to just grab it, click it, and it will just work. It won't. You are going to have to, you know, get your hands dirty. And to put it into context, some of the volts I've seen, they only require 1.15 as a manual setting, but left on auto, they've been going beyond 1.35, and some of them have even gone above 1.4. Now, if you would manually put those volts into the BIOS literally has a heart attack, tells you it's too much. You know, it doesn't even go red, it goes purple, because it's like holding its breath and like, Argh! It's the boards, all of the brands, they natively will put them way up, and that's just because of, you know, like bad silicon that's out there. And all of the testing that I've done, you do need to kind of bring it down, calm it down. But the most important thing to remember with that is when you do bring those volts down, it will bring your temperatures down as well. When I did my testing, I was using a Corsair H110i GT. Now that is with 140mm fans, and I just had it set on a quiet profile. It wasn't silent, just a quiet profile. And on one of the boards that I was testing, we were getting way above 80 degrees. And then with the exact same settings moved on to a different motherboard, we were getting sort of like around the 74, 75 mark. So although it's quite an early time for me to say, it does seem that as the BIOS is maturing, it is making a big difference, but it might end up coming down to the fact that the better boards bring lower temperatures. It's a bit too early for me to say, but as our testing progresses, it's certainly going to be an interesting one to find out. But if you want to go 5 gigahertz, one of the things I can't stress enough, or you want a big overclock and you want to run fast memory, is you are going to have to invest in a decent cooler, or you're going to have to get used to the fact that things are going to make a lot of noise. If you get a much better cooler, you'll be able to have a quieter system. If you've not got quite a good cooler, then you're going to end up having to ramp the fans up and be prepared to have it working hard to keep things cool. I personally would say that an 80 degrees kind of temperature is going to be a good starting, or sort of like a good cap. And also one of the things I would say is don't necessarily be worried about it hitting 80 degrees, but it's just, you want to keep that as kind of an upper threshold. I personally prefer a quieter system compared to a cooler system, so I'll always let mine go that little bit higher. Going beyond 80 degrees is the point when you might then start getting some, not necessarily stability issues, but you might get blue screens, or you might get a bench that will fail, or a render that will fail because of the heat. And that's all going to come down to, again, your board, what BIOS you're on, and several other kind of factors. But with the refinement process on these new 7th generation processors, we've got, it's now saying that it can do 10-bit decoding and 60 frames per second 4K. And one of the weird things is, with the benchmarks, some of the benchmarks, it doesn't really make any difference. Some of the benchmarks, it seems to perform worse than the older ones. And then some of the other benchmarks, they've literally just yomped to the top. So I've kind of got a bit of a mixed bag to talk you through with actual benches today. So the first one we're going to talk about is IDA 64. And with IDA, we run, this is for the CPU benchmarks, not the memory benchmarks. And what we can see is the 7700K and the 7600K are actually, fairly down near the bottom. This is a really good kind of grunt benchmark that we can run. But the weird thing is you can actually see that the 7700K does perform a little bit worse than the old 4790K. And the old 4790K was a processor that did turbo to 4.5 gigahertz. So when you kind of put those two side by side, you can see that they, the older at 4.5 did a little bit better. But when you look at the 7700K, you can see the 6700K just below it. And same with the 7600K at the bottom, you can see the 6600K just below that. So compared to the old Skylake stuff, they are ever so slightly, just marginally better. But you do need to remember that we were running these at their normal turbo speed. So we would expect the 7700 and the 7th generation, we would expect it to run faster than the 6th generation because they've got a higher clock speed. Right, and then when we move on to PC Mark 7, this is one of those ones where I said there is an astronomical difference. So with this, you can see the 77 and the 7600K are at the top of the graph. There's 6950X with an overclock is below it. So, and then when we come down to the old 7600K, they're actually, down in the bottom third of the graph. So this is one of those benchmarks that absolutely loves this, this new silicon. Then when we move on to PC Mark 8, it is actually the same story. We've got the 77 and the 7600K at the top, and then actually we've got the 6000 series, 6th generation stuff, at the bottom with all the kind of different iterations in between. So one of the things I can say is that clock for clock on certain benchmarks, there isn't a great deal of difference between the 6th and the 7th. But then with some of the processing benchmarks, there is a huge difference. So it's actually going to be dependent on what you're doing. If you're just kind of sniffing around the internet and stuff, the extra bit of clock speed, it may help. A few games, it may help. But when you actually start going into actual workload, especially if you're going to be doing 3D rendering, not 3D rendering, sorry, like video encoding. And if you go and have a look on the OC3D website, we have done other benchmarks like X265 benchmark, so HVEC. Then we've also done the Asus Real Bench, we've done Geekbench, we've done Passmark. There's a lot of other tests there that you can go and have a look at. But let's face it, I've had enough to talk about today. We didn't need to go through all of it. So some of you out there will find that you will get a big jump in performance. General stuff, kind of general work, bit of video encoding, that sort of stuff. That does seem to benefit really nicely. Some of the older benchmarks actually seem to turn their nose up and not like the new stuff though. And as you can see, have still been favouring things like the 4790K. So, a couple of gens back, I think that was 5th gen. So it is a bit of a mixed bag. So when we come into a conclusion, one of the things I would say is people are going to want to know, if I've got a Z170 motherboard and I've got a 6th generation processor, do I need to upgrade? I'd probably say no, unless you're absolutely hell-bent on having a 5 gigahertz processor. But if you want a 5 gigahertz processor and you want to overclock and you want faster memory, then I think you're probably going to have to, like I said, upgrade your cooling. I think that's going to be critical. Especially if you want a quiet environment. And then, you know, power supply and stuff like that, they're not using a particularly, you know, a less amount of power or anything like that. So you haven't got any worries there. But cooling is definitely something that I would suggest that you work on. And then also with the motherboards, you are going to have to stay on top of those BIOS or sit down and just wait for a week or two to see how well they come through. If you're on older stuff like Z97 or something like that, then and you want to get onto the M.2 bandwagon, then Z97 would probably be, or Z87, that would probably be the time where I would say, if you guys are asking me, should I upgrade, then I would probably say it wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea. For you guys, you're going to get the M.2, USB 3.1, you're going to run out of battery power apparently, but I'll talk as much as I can do to the end. But yeah, so you guys, I would say it would be worthwhile. Again, with you guys though, you're going to need DDR4, you're going to need a new memory, you're going to need a DDR4 new memory, you're going to need new cooler, you're going to need a new motherboard. So it's a big upgrade. But then it does get you into the latest kind of tech. With an M.2 drive, you are going to notice a difference over a normal solid state drive as well. The other thing to kind of keep in mind as well for you guys, if you are upgrading, if you go onto Z270, you do need to use Windows 10 as well, because they're not supporting the older operating systems at all with these ones. But my camera battery is flashing, and that's a good enough reason for me to say I'm going to leave it here. I would love to hear your feedback. I know it's been a lot of talking, but for me that's the best way I've got personally of getting the data and the information across to you. And I hope that you understand that this is just me trying to share my experience with these. I'm not trying to sell you to it at all, and think about it as a couple of mates sat down the pub having a chat, and that's the kind of angle I've gone with it. And I also think that if you're going to be buying this stuff, it's a lot of money, and you're going to want to spend a little bit of time listening to some bloke that's been sat in a room for a couple of weeks just working on this stuff. But for now at least, this is Tiny Tom Logan with his first of very many reviews, because there will be all the board reviews live on the channel as well. But this has been the Kaby Lake 7700K and 7600K plus the Z270 Chipset review. And that's me needing a drink of water, out.